We just played a snippet of the video that was filmed last night outside Parliament of Sir Keir Starmer and that mob, and I'm sure it's a clip you will have seen numerous times today. What did you think when you saw it?
It's sickening. I don't think any politician should have to put up with what Keir Starmer experienced last night. And, it is a reflection, I think, of the toxic cocktail of conspiracy theories, smears and lies that swill around our politics now. And I think the choice for all responsible politicians is, do we unite, whatever our other differences might be, to push all of that to the margins of our politics? Or do we do what Boris Johnson did, which is almost weaponise that to make attacks on an opponent, and to do that in the full knowledge that that can and does stir up the kind of hatred and abuse and harassment that Keir Starmer experienced yesterday. So this is a really dangerous moment for our politics, but I think it can also be a positive moment for our politics if responsible politicians come together in the right spirit. Now, I would finally just say that credit to Keir Starmer and to David Lammy, actually, who will know more than most of us about these far-right attacks, for the way they conducted themselves. I have had some experience personally of being confronted on the streets by the far-right. It's not pleasant, it's deeply unpleasant, and I'm sure they will have been deeply shaken by it, but I think they deserve credit for the way in which they handled it. But this is a moment to decide that this is not acceptable in our politics. Tough scrutiny of politicians is essential in our democracy, but when that crosses the line and becomes the stirring up of hate and abuse, something has gone far wrong, and that's a moment to take a line in the sand, to draw a line in the sand and say that we cannot allow this to continue.
There are calls for Boris Johnson to withdraw his comments completely and apologise. Downing Street say he has clarified his comments. Boris Johnson, these are his words. He said, after initial criticism of his comments regarding Sir Keir Starmer and Jimmy Savile, he said, "I want to be very clear about this because a lot of people have got hot under the collar and I understand why. Let's be absolutely clear. I'm talking not about the Leader of the Opposition's personal record when he was DPP, and I totally understand that he had nothing to do personally with these decisions. I was making a point about his responsibility for the organisation as a whole. I really do want to clarify that because it is important." It's a clarification. It's not an apology. Why is it politicians find sorry the hardest word?
Well, not all of us do, frankly, and I don't think we should all be tainted by the standards and the behaviour of Boris Johnson. The out-and-out smear that he hurled at Keir Starmer in the House of Commons last week, frankly, has been compounded by the weasel words that you have just read out from Boris Johnson. He knew what he was doing. He's many things, but he's not naive, and any politician who chooses to weaponise a conspiracy theory circulated around social media by the far right against an opponent knows what they are doing. And either they are trying to stir up the kind of hate that flows from that, or they don't care about that being the consequence. And either way, that is behaviour that is just unbefitting somebody in Boris Johnson's position. If he has a shred of decency, and I appreciate that may be the flaw in the argument I'm about to make, but if he has a single shred of decency, he will withdraw the comments that he made completely, and he will fully, unreservedly, unequivocally apologise to Keir Starmer, and he will join others in saying that we should hold each other to account, we should have robust debate in a democracy, but we should all draw the line at bringing the smears and the lies and the conspiracy theories of the far right and the other trolls that populate social media into the mainstream of our democracy. Because if we allow that to happen, it's like battery acid that will corrode trust in our politics and corrode the very fabric of our democracy. And frankly, Boris Johnson's in a hole of his own making right now, but it is not going to reflect well on him if, in order to try to get himself out of that hole, he's prepared to throw the whole of our democracy to the wolves in the process.
OK, I just want to talk to you about the difference between taking personal responsibility and accountability for something and being the leader who takes collective responsibility, because there's been a lot of talk about that recently, whether people should apologise for personal actions or actions that are taken by an organisation such as the government or the Tory party, and the leader should take accountability for that. Because there are a lot of people that will say you can't pick and choose. So Keir Starmer has taken personal credit for CPS prosecutions, for things that happened in the organisation that he wasn't personally involved in. So a lot of people will say, what's the difference? Why would he not take responsibility for this decision that wasn't personal, but he did head up the organisation that did make that decision? Do you want to put that issue to bed for us? Because that's the argument that a lot of people will put to what you're saying today.
Yeah, look, leaders, and I'm a leader of a government, a leader of a party, I know that it comes with the territory to have to take overall responsibility for things that you are not personally involved in or responsible for. And I'm pretty sure Keir Starmer understands that as well. But, you know, that's what Boris Johnson and the Tories, or some Tories, because to their credit, some of them are not going along with this, want us to think was the issue at stake. And all I would suggest to people making that argument is go back and look at what Boris Johnson actually said in the House of Commons last week. He didn't say to Keir Starmer, you were in charge of the Crown Prosecution Service at the time the decisions about Jimmy Savile were made. He said, and I don't have it in front of me, so I may be slightly paraphrasing here, but he said something along the lines of, you spent all of your time prosecuting journalists and not prosecuting Jimmy Savile. The clear implication being that these were decisions that Keir Starmer had taken personally, not just that there were decisions that were taken by an organisation that he was in charge of. I come back to this. We can all, and the Tories and Boris Johnson want to dance on the head of these pins right now, but he knew what he was doing. He was facing a really tough encounter in the House of Commons, and rightly and properly so, given the backdrop to this was the Sue Gray report. And he decided to, throw the dead cat on the table to try to distract people's attention with a baseless smear on the integrity and the character of Keir Starmer. And that is what is so despicable. And in order to do that, he went to the deepest, darkest recesses of social media and took out a far-right conspiracy theory, lie, smear, call it what you want. That's what it was about. And Boris Johnson knew that that is what he was doing. And, I'm in a different political party to Keir Starmer. There is many, many things I disagree with Keir Starmer on. I'll argue over things with Keir Starmer, he'll argue with me. But this is my central point here. If we care about democracy, then decent politicians, regardless of what divides us, have to be able to come together in defence of the fundamental norms and basic decency in our politics. Because if we lose that, then we lose everything. And that is too big a price to pay for Boris Johnson to try, unsuccessfully as it happened, to wriggle off a hook that he had put himself on.
Just finally, while we have you First Minister, you have a perspective that the majority of people don't have in terms of being a leader. You are First Minister of Scotland. Boris Johnson is the Prime Minister. What's it like to think about leaving a job like that? Because the criticism of Boris Johnson is that he will not resign, when many people think he should. Many people think this is a tipping point, but he has been unequivocal. He will not be resigning. How difficult is it to make that kind of decision?
Well, I've not had to make that decision, but I've had to contemplate it, and I'll come back to that in a second. But before I do, the kind of job I have, the job Boris Johnson has, these are privileges. They're not entitlements. Nobody is entitled to be First Minister or Prime Minister. And there are jobs that you do, and we all make mistakes in the course of it. None of us are perfect, but they are jobs that we do to further the interests of the people we serve, not to further our own interests. So I think it is incumbent on everybody holding a position like this that you are prepared to contemplate when it might be the right time for you to demit that office. And, my own personal experience, this time last year, I was being accused in a completely different context of having breached the ministerial code. I should say I was found by an independent adviser and in an independent report not to have breached the ministerial code. But while that was ongoing, I had within myself to ask myself some serious questions, and I came to the conclusion in my mind that had I been deemed to have breached the ministerial code, I didn't think I had, but if an independent person had said I had, then in the interests of the office I hold and in the interests of the country, I at that point would have resigned. I'm sure it would have been really difficult, and I'm glad that didn't come to pass. But these responsibilities are heavy responsibilities, and they require all of us in these offices to contemplate things that perhaps others might think is difficult to imagine. So Boris Johnson has to fundamentally think about the interests of the country. He is discredited. He has, the Sue Gray report, constrained though it was pretty brutal in its conclusions about lack of leadership. I don't think it is possible to come to a conclusion other than that he has serially and seriously misled the House of Commons. And at a time of mounting crisis for the country, we're not quite out of the COVID pandemic yet, cost of living pressures increasing, real problems for people the length and breadth of the country. They need a Prime Minister, the UK needs a Prime Minister that isn't completely consumed by these problems of his own position. And therefore, I think if Boris Johnson has decency and integrity, however difficult it may be, he will reach the conclusion that the time is right for him to step aside.